Hey everyone, it's Chris, and welcome to another episode of my series covering a discovery of witches. In this video, we'll be taking a look at episode 5. If this is your first time here, I take TV shows and movies based on books and compare and contrast them to the source material, so there might be spoilers ahead. Viewer beware. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of my future videos, and click the notification icon to join the notification squad, as it were, and be the first to know when something new drops. Okay, now with all of that out of the way, let's just get into it. First up, we're going to look at Gillian. So this was a pretty major change from the novels in a couple of ways. In the source material, Matthew heads off to Oxford to investigate the break-in and discovers that vampires broke into the lab as opposed to witches. The witches, including our friend Gillian, broke into Diana's apartment, which provoked Matthew since it was a violation of Diana's territory, and as we have found out, vampires are very territorial in this world. In the novels, he also just straight up killed Gillian and left her in a place the witches would find her to serve as a warning. Also, we didn't see any of this. We are just told about it, that Matthew killed her later in the book. Okay, next up we have hunting with Isabeau. This was greatly cut down in the show. In the novel, they begin with small animals and work their way up to a doe, which is more important than you might think given what happens later in the book. I would have issues with how they handled this in the show if they had left the other part in the adaptation, but since they didn't, it makes sense to cut to the chase, so to speak, as they did here. Next we have hunting with Matthew. Speaking of that other part that they left out, not long after Diana had hunted with Isabeau, she forces Matthew to take her hunting. It was a pretty interesting moment for both characters, since you really got to see how ashamed and fearful Matthew was to share all of himself with Diana. I get why it isn't, in the show, but it seems like the loss of a really beautiful moment of growth for both characters, so kind of torn on that one. Next up, we have a chat with Hamish. I don't believe this happened in this way at this point in the novel, but boy, was it a nice moment in the episode. Also, in the novels, they establish when he is introduced that Hamish is gay and his partner is a human, which, knowing these things, makes what he says to Matthew much more powerful and meaningful. So, I love this moment, but it's kind of odd that they weren't super upfront about that in the show. But just like intercutting Isabeau hunting with Matthew attacking Gillian, this was a fantastic change by the writers, so kudos to them. Okay, next we have massive foreshadowing. Yeah, of course I can't really say what they are foreshadowing because spoilers. But there were two moments of massive foreshadowing in this sequence around and in the church. I love how they handled it in the show, and the payoff will be massive if they wrap up the first book storyline in this season. Just remember, I told you so. Okay, next we're going to look at awkward phone calls. So in the novel, it is during this call that Matthew first professes his love for Diana, which makes the scene where she runs out and says, "Say it," make a bit more sense to me, because he had already said it, but not to her face, and so she already knew what he was going to say, but it was the demand to just say it to her face right now that was very powerful. I do like that they decided to have him say it to her face to face the first time, but they probably should have changed her demanding line there, since they cut the other part out. It just didn't feel right within the context of this new storyline. Okay, next up we have You're a Declarement Now. So this was almost 100% as it was in the novel, with a few minor and one major exception. In the novels, when Matthew says they will leave now, that they have broken the covenant, Isabeau slaps him hard across the face. I loved this so much. The how dare you moment from her was very much in line with her character and the gravity of the situation. Other than that, everything was pretty much spot on, and again, The presence that Lindsay Duncan brings to her portrayal of Isabeau is really something. And that presence was on full display at the end of this scene. And holy God, I would not want to be on the bad side of Isabeau. Okay, next up we have Two Witches. This is new for the show as well. The suggestion that Satu might be part of a prophecy is strange, since I have mentioned earlier she is only briefly in the first book. It is also interesting that I believe they changed the prophecy, since in the novels it is referred to as dealing with a witch that will bring down the de Clermonts, not all vampires. So looking forward to seeing, with that twist to the story, what they're going to do going forward. And finally, we're going to talk about Domenico and Juliette. This was another welcome addition to the show. Seeing Domenico wind up and point Juliette at Matthew and Diana was pretty great. The circumstances that led her to Diana and Matthew are much different in the novels and much less interesting in my opinion, so well done on the part of the writers. I'm excited to see if they also change where and when she confronts them, since this moment in the book is a watershed moment for both Diana and Matthew, not to mention their extended families. Okay, that's it for this episode. There weren't as many pivotal moments that had been adapted differently in this episode. This was pretty much playing as close to the bones as you could get from what we saw in the novels. So, pretty spectacular job again by the writers. Sticking that close to the source material, but making needed changes that really improve the story. So, again, man, you guys are just killing it. I'm really fascinated to see where they're going to go with it. Like, how they... We've only got a couple episodes left, and there's a good chunk of story left to tell of the first book. So how they're going to do that and it not feel rushed is going to be pretty cool to see. But I believe they can do it. So that's it for me. I will see you guys in the next video, and until then, find a good book and read that thing. Later.